All right, welcome ICS4C. Folks, we can see the light at the end of the tunnel now. We're almost there. This is our second day on retrieving data from our GUI, our graphical user interface. This is the connection between our HTML and our JavaScript. You have, I hope, this smart notebook file that you're going to add your own details and reminders to yourself. You also have some HTML which I've given you, and it looks something like this one. And maybe you've got it in Notepad++, maybe you got it in JS Bin or JS Fiddle or whatever, but you got to get it working. Let me show you what it looks like. Launch in Chrome. Very sort of simple page. We've got some radio buttons. Remember, radio buttons are ones where there's only one selection possible, and the check boxes are ones where more than one is possible, and the drop down menu is where one of them is possible. Okay, and of course our button, our submit button, doesn't work yet because we don't have any JavaScript written at all. So that's what we're going to be doing today, is building the JavaScript and learning about how to grab stuff from checkboxes and radio buttons. So first thing, unlike text boxes or text areas, when using checkboxes and radio buttons, you must give each choice a value. Otherwise, user selection doesn't have much meaning in our JavaScript. So what am I talking about here is when we did text boxes, we didn't necessarily have to give our input a default value. We didn't have to do this because generally whatever they typed in a text box would be the value, whatever the user typed in. But just checking that, checking the radio button, well, what does that mean for our JavaScript? What do we want to pass to our JavaScript? And it can be anything. It could be, you know, words like this that are similar to the thing that they're selecting, or they could be numbers in string form. They're numbers, but they can be just about anything. Whoops, I don't want that. No. Uh-oh. That's okay. I'm all right. I'll just cancel that. And here, close that window. I clicked wrong. Okay, so here we go. So our example was that the input type radio value equals 2. The name is RPS. And as we'll see in a second, RPS is kind of the link between all of the possible radio buttons. That's the way the DOM realizes that if it's a radio button, you can only check one, is it compares it to other input types with the same name. We use 2 in our JavaScript. So somehow when the user checks off the radio button, we're going to use the value 2 in our JavaScript somehow, I guess. The text paper is usually not accessible to us. Now that's not necessarily true. We could go and grab it using fancy JavaScript or jQuery, but often we don't really care. If we wanted the word paper, we'd actually put the value as paper. The name allows us to access the group of radio buttons in a loop. So the name allows us to process all of them in a group. Often it makes sense for the value to be the same string that we would have as a label. In this case, paper, but we're using 2. So often, you know, when we check the paper radio button, well, it might make sense for the value to be paper, but it doesn't have to be. Okay, so what do we want to do? Well, I guess we want to process. Let's see if it's on the next. Okay, so this is in your note again still. First, we collect up all the radio buttons into one array-like structure. In our example, it's called instruments. So here, I'm going to grab that code and put this in blank JavaScript. Probably I should have it have some sort of starting thing where I'm going to have a function start func or whatever you want to call that, right? And then in here, it's going to go get the elements by name. So it's going to get all the elements by name, the instrument where was it? So in the code, the instrument all had the name instrument. So that one line of code, is going to grab all of the radio buttons because the radio buttons had the name inst. Then the instrument variable is an array of HTML input objects. So each of these instrument things in the array are objects, similar to the text boxes. We saw that last time. We really only care about two of its attributes or methods. And that, as you learn more about HTML and JavaScript, this might not be true, but there's really two things that we want. We want to know the value and if the box has been checked or not. And those are actually HTML things, value and checked. Value is what we saw in our HTML code that we gave it, right? There's the value, 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 value. And checked, this operation checked is actually whether the user has checked off that. Notice instrument I.checked is a Boolean. So this is either true or false. We can use it to make decisions, if statements or while loops, right? So instrument I.checked is either true or false. So let's see that in action. Let's see that in action. Let's actually do that. Oops. In my JavaScript code now, I'm going to have a little for loop. For var I equals 0. And then we have instrument, dot length. And I goofed that up because it's got to be I is less than instrument length, right? That's the length of the array. And then I plus plus. Here's my for loop. This is the end of my for loop. And in here, what do I want to do? Inside my loop, what do I want to do? Let's just console log whether it's been checked or not. Oh, hang on. Instrument I dot value plus so this is actually that bass, guitar, singer, whatever. And remember the plus sign concatenates strings together. This is a string, and then it adds or concatenates this little thing together, and that's going to actually just going to be, I want instrument I, because it's an array of radio buttons, remember, dot checked, and I'll show you that that's a Boolean. All right, so let's see if that works. I'm going to save that and go to my code. I could try and check that, but I want to see what happens. So I press F12 to get to the console, and there was an error because I spelled instrument wrong, apparently. Did you see that? You probably did, didn't you? Thanks for pointing it out. It's embarrassing. Instrument, where instrument. Yep, that looks better. Save. Try that again. Thanks for pointing that out. Wasting everybody's time. Okay, there we go. So we've got base was the one value, checked false, checked false, checked false, checked false. Why are they all checked false even though I went like this? Well, remember, this runs as soon as the page is loaded. The user has had no chance to check it. So later on, we're going to have to use this rock and roll button here to actually enter the data, and we'll get to that in a moment. Notice that usually what we do is, if this radio button hasn't been checked, we don't care about processing its value. So what we can do is we'll add a little statement that says if instrument is checked, console log the value, and then that's it. And so only log it to the console, only process it if the user has selected it. Okay? And that will, unfortunately, that makes our program pretty boring, because when we first run it, how many are actually checked? Here, I'm going to clear that off. None of them, right? Nothing happens because none of them are checked. And remember, I don't have the submit button working yet, so nothing's going on. Remember, one thing I could do, just to show you that it works, is go back to my HTML, and I could check one off. I could have a default check. And this is a good practice to have, so that there's some default. And notice that the checked is actually checked. It's not true. I think true would work too, but let's see that in action now. So it should print off one thing, guitar. There, and it did, right? And notice that the web page, it shows up as having a default value now, which is pretty dangerous, but you know, you don't ever want to press submit if one of these things has to be checked. Okay. Again, not very good, because I can't submit that I'm a rhythm guitar player or a drum player. You know, that doesn't work. I want to get this submit button working, and I'm going to do that, and I'm going to pick that up in part 2.